Stephen, first off, always good to see you. Glad you were able to join us. Do you get the same impression? Does that, by not releasing the transcript, is that just kind of a sign that it didn't really go in Biden's favor?
Well, it's really hard to say what's fair after the disclosure was forced of President Trump's phone call with the Ukrainian leader at the time. Prior to that, in my entire government experience, we didn't ever release presidential phone call transcripts. But what you would have is a readout, either by the two leaders themselves when they met, or by senior staff that would go to the media, so that each side would have a chance to sort of frame what the substance was that was transacted. And there's two things going on here. One is the Democrats' use of COVID as an excuse for non-transparency. And so the fact that our leader doesn't go anywhere and doesn't have joint avails with any of his counterparts is something that is wildly out of step with all of his modern predecessors. So we don't have transparency into what's going on. A lot of times when leaders meet, they would have what they would call spray at the top of a meeting to be able to have a little Q&A. Our current president famously shuts down all of those things, just sits there sort of like roadkill, doesn't answer, acts as if nothing has ever been asked, and waits for his staff to say, thank you very much, and shoo everyone out of the room. So we don't have that transparency. The excuse has been COVID stuff. But really, when it comes to these phone calls, the other side is taking advantage. The Chinese or others, they play political warfare back at us. They give these fulsome readouts of their side of the story. And on our side, we end up with like a paragraph of gibberish that says a call was made and words were exchanged and all will be well. Thank you. And it's just complete worthless garbage when it comes from what's coming on the readouts of our side. And that, I think, is a failure to represent democracy. Why are we not accentuating transparency and what our message is? American people can take it if we're not getting all we want out of the Chinese. We don't expect them to roll over and purr like a kitten, but they want to know that we're trying. They want to know what we said. And if challenged, prove it.
Right. That's a good point. Talking with Stephen Yates, you can find him at YatesComms on Twitter. There were some signs, or at least reported signs last week, that China may be moving to this position of neutrality as it relates to Russia and Ukraine. Do you believe any of that? I mean, I don't think that publicly they would come out and flag wave for anything. I think they would do everything below the table.
Well, I think we can take it as an article of faith that Xi Jinping, the Communist Party, are in it for themselves. There is no such thing as on-side or neutrality with them. They are in it for themselves all the way. And so they don't have permanent peace and friendship with Vladimir Putin, although things seem to be going more swimmingly on that side of the ledger these days than on the American side of the ledger. And so I wouldn't worry too much about are they leaning to one side. I'd worry more about what are we really prepared to do to impose some consequences upon them. They have intervened in the war against Ukraine. What are we doing about that? They could intervene in a war against Taiwan or Japan or somewhere else. What are we prepared to do about that? And if the answer is nothing, we're doing a great job of preparing. But if the answer is more than nothing, and for the Chinese to believe it, we need to be talking about some of that now. We should have learned from the Ukraine situation that deterrence fails when you say, we're going to do super mean stuff to you after you do something horrible. Yeah. They then keep going and wait and see what happens. We don't want China doing that because it's bigger than Russia and the consequences will be larger than Ukraine.
Yeah, from what I read just in the past week or so, the administration, there was some outreach to Taiwan. We sent some officials to Taiwan. And then, of course, we had this military flex or test. We're doing these exercises with Japan just to kind of show that we're there. But that seems, that's kind of custom. Correct me if I'm wrong, but it doesn't seem like we're doing anything more than we've always done for the past 10 years.
Well, I don't think we are doing anything that's out of what would be called the norm. So I think basically, especially in the wake of what happened with Ukraine, where deterrence failed, and it only really had a rally based on the courage and resiliency of the Ukrainian people. Europeans in their neighborhood kind of waking up a little late at the sobriety checkpoint saying, whoa, this could come for us. We better help the Ukrainians before we have to fight in our own land. That's what turned the tide. In Asia, we can't wait for things like that. And so I think that we should be looking at bold moves to allow our allies and partners there to be more self-sufficient in their defense. Make sure that when they have critical supply chains, that they're not dependent on China, that maybe they could be dependent on each other and us. Basically, the free world, standing there for the free world and weaning ourselves away from our addiction to these dictatorships for our supply chains and our raw materials.
That's a great point. Talking with Stephen Yates with the America First Policy Institute. Now, directing focus from China to Ukraine. This is gonna sound really dumb when I ask this, but I mean it seems a silly issue. Are there no jets in Europe to give to Ukraine? Are there no jets or anything like that over there? They got nothing?
Clearly, they exist. And it is kind of hard to understand why this great shuffle game has taken a whole month of war to sort out who's going to send what where. Clearly, this is something that should have been sorted out in the more than a year, where troops were kind of amassing sort of the warnings of war were on a crescendo. NATO, that august alliance, which again, I don't want to denigrate the sacrifice and heroics of the past, but we can't live on nostalgia. This alliance has been in search of purpose and effectualness in recent years. And it hasn't exactly distinguished itself in this exercise. Clearly, there was material there that would work.
And additionally with this, I think you and I have talked about this, mentioned it once before. I mean, when we were having the proxy battle in Vietnam, essentially against Russia, Russia had no problem with supplying the Viet Cong directly with whatever munitions, armament, artillery, whatever that they needed. And they've never had that problem in any kind of conflict. Would it be, and I'm not saying that I'm for this, but I'm trying to understand the logic. How would that be bad if the United States matched what they did and just said, you know what, you want a jet, here's a jet. If no one in Europe, if they're all going to be stingy and no one's going to give you anything, then, here's it. Why is that considered an escalation on our part, but it never is considered an escalation on Russia's part?
Well, because the establishment decides what the rules are, I guess, and we don't get to argue with them. It's sort of like two weeks to flatten the curve. You're not allowed to question it. It just is what it is, and if you challenge it, then you're Putin. You just have to roll with that. But I mean, obviously, it was escalatory to impose these so-called crippling sanctions on Moscow, on Putin, and everybody else. Obviously, kicking them out of the financial markets was escalatory. In the textbook case, that is an act of war. So, once you're into one form of war, I can't really tell you in my 30 years of working on this, when you sort of slide over. No, you're in war, but now you're really in war.
Yeah.
And so we're playing games with ourselves. But the bottom line, the weakness is we don't have a clear definition of what the United States seeks as an endpoint in this. We don't have and if we don't have that, then we don't have a clear sense of what the means of getting there are. Are we driving it? Is someone else driving it? And we're playing a supporting role? Who's doing it and how? We're just drifting. And so that's why it's really just a comms exercise for these guys. That's why they're trying to say, oh, it's all because of this America First mindset of the last administration that led to this. That's horse hockey. It was only the America First approach that gave Europe a chance, but it resisted. And now they're paying the price. But they're all playing comms games right now because they don't really know. Are we going to settle for part of the Ukrainian territory? Are we going to give them security guarantees going forward? No one's got answers. And if there aren't any answers, this is just going to continue to churn and burn.
Yeah. Last quick question. Talking with Stephen Yates, America First Policy Institute and chair of the China Policy Initiative. It seems like most of the commentary is kind of looking at each other going, is this World War III? Are we in World War III? Where are we on the map? Like, we're looking because I don't see how this ends. I really don't. I don't see how it ends unless one obliterates the other or all of Russia's crappy Chinese-made tanks break down. One of the two.
Yeah, I think the major tripwire that gets into the hyperbolic predictions that I think Breathless War Inc. was trying to sell from the get-go is if it crosses into a direct conflict with a NATO country. All of a sudden, it's do or die for all of NATO. And that's where it expands rapidly. So far, Putin seems to be tickling the edges. There was a missile or two that landed near Poland,
Right.
but in Ukrainian territory. But so far, this has been very methodically within just Ukraine. And so far, it just seems like it's going to churn there until there's some kind of a deal made for a ceasefire, and we'll see how that holds.
Yeah, until there's nothing left to churn. Goodness. I mean, the destruction is real. Stephen Yates, always so good to talk with you. Go find him on Twitter @YatesComs. Appreciate the time, my friend. Thank you so much. Good to see you.
Thank you, Dana. Take care.